Welcome to Detective Duo, where classic mysteries come alive, from quiet villages to secret meetings with Tommy and Tuppence themselves. Do remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. The thunder began as a polite grumble somewhere over Westminster, but by the time Tommy and Tuppence Beresford reached their modest flat in South Kensington, it was shaking the very sash windows. Rain streaked the panes and tapped at the sill like a messenger too impatient to wait for dawn. Tuppence dropped her umbrella in the stand with a flourish and unpinned her hat. "If this is London spring, Tommy, I'm ready to retire to the Sahara. One could drown between the corner and the door." Her husband, a little damp about the collar but still in amiable spirits, flipped the sitting-room lamp on. "You're forgetting that in the Sahara, dear, one perishes of thirst instead of pneumonia. A change of demise, perhaps, but not an improvement." He bent to the small pile of Evening Post that had come through the letter slot. Bills, advertisements, and one curious envelope, thicker than the rest, water-blotched and without return address. The paper looked oddly old-fashioned, its edges uneven as though torn from a ledger. Tommy whistled softly. "Anonymous admirer?" he asked, offering it to Tuppence. "Not with handwriting that resembles a spider on roller skates," she said, slitting it open with the tip of a paper knife. Inside was a folded note, ink-smudged but legible, and something that slipped to the carpet with a papery flutter, a visitor's pass to the cabinet war rooms. The letter read, in a cramped but deliberate hand, "Some debts of war were never paid. Look beneath the map room before someone else does." There was no signature, only the initials HK, and a faint smear of what looked like rust or perhaps dried blood along the fold. Tuppence held it beneath the lamplight, eyes narrowing. "HK," she murmured. "Harold King, Henry Kent, the initials of half of England." Tommy turned over the pass. "Issued for tomorrow, rather generous of them to send an invitation to Churchill's old haunt. I can't imagine they're handing out passes like chocolates." "The letter smells of carbolic soap," she noted suddenly, lifting it closer. "And there's a misquotation here. Kites rise highest against the wind. It should be against the wind, not in." Tommy laughed softly. "My dear, you found a grammatical ghost." But Tuppence wasn't laughing. She studied the stain again, her imagination already busy. "Do you remember the war rooms, Tommy? The narrow corridors, that humming of telephones, the air thick with tobacco and tension? Whoever wrote this knows that world." He shrugged, trying for nonchalance. "It could be some historian planning an elaborate prank, or a journalist hoping we'll bite." She folded the letter neatly. "The only thing I bite these days are mysteries. Look beneath the map room in D." Indeed. Outside, the rain thickened. Lightning flared white through the curtains, showing the little room in sharp detail, the clock on the mantel, the framed photograph of their younger selves in uniform, a faint steam rising from the kettle Fritz the cat had knocked over earlier that evening. The past, it seemed, was reluctant to stay buried. Tommy fetched the telephone directory. If this is official, there must be a number. He dialed the switchboard printed faintly on the pass. The ring crackled through the storm. A woman's voice answered, brisk and efficient. "Cabinet War Rooms, after-hours service." "I've received a visitor's pass," Tommy began. "Dated for tomorrow, initials HK." The voice interrupted. "You're expected. Ask for Mrs. Hartley." The line went dead before he could reply. Tuppence stared. "Expected? We didn't accept anything yet." "She sounded like someone accustomed to command," Tommy muttered, hanging up. "Reminded me of an old quartermaster who once ordered me to stand still or be repainted." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Then we'd better dress appropriately for our repainting. Shall we say, tomorrow morning?" "Tomorrow evening, apparently. The pass says 1900 hours." She held the paper again, tracing the faint indentation of handwriting through the damp patch. "There's something written beneath the fold." A small corner of the paper had softened with rain. As she unfolded it, a scrap tore loose, revealing a few penciled shorthand loops, tiny, quick, as if added in haste. She fetched her magnifying glass from the mantel and peered closely. "Urgent, tonight," she read aloud, translating the symbols with ease. "Not tomorrow, tonight." They took only their coats and the letter. Within 15 minutes they were on the Underground, rain drumming the carriage roof like a summons. Tommy checked his watch. 9:30. Not much of tonight left. I don't fancy leaving someone to die of impatience or worse because we chose to be sensible, he sighed. You realise that's the sort of reasoning that led us into half our scrapes since 1919. And led us out of them, she countered sweetly. Lightning flashed again, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. For one absurd moment, the letter looked almost alive, its ink glistening faintly under the lamplight, its words urging them onward. Tommy fetched his coat from the stand. Very well, Mrs. Beresford. If we end up in the newspapers, I'll insist they spell our names correctly this time. She laughed, fastening her buttons. As long as they spell them together. They stepped into the rain. The street shimmered with reflections from lamps and passing motor cars. The city, restless and wet, seemed to whisper its own secrets. A constable nodded to them as they turned toward the underground, unremarkable Londoners heading out into the night. But beneath their calm exterior, excitement stirred, a sense that the war years, thought long closed, were about to open again like a file stamped top secret. Tuppence tightened her grip on her umbrella as thunder rolled. You know, Tommy, she said quietly, if this turns out to be a ghost story, I'll be dreadfully cross. He grinned. Then let's hope it's only murder. They disappeared into the downpour, two familiar figures against the glow of Whitehall lamps, while behind them, on the little table by the window, the torn corner of the letter stirred faintly in the draught. Its shorthand squiggle caught the lamplight one last time, urgent tonight, before the flame wavered and went out. Whitehall shimmered with the aftermath of rain. Street lamps cast their pale halos upon slick pavements, where the reflections of taxis and umbrellas wavered like phantoms from another age. The clock at the Treasury showed 9:45 as Tommy and Tuppence crossed the road, their shoes clapping softly against the wet stone. Ahead loomed a nondescript door, half hidden in the shadow of an archway. A small brass plaque, polished to modern respectability, read simply, Cabinet War Rooms, authorised personnel only. A uniformed guard waited beneath the awning, his torch angled downwards. Evening, sir, madam, you're expected. His tone was neutral but faintly curious. He checked their pass and, satisfied, gestured toward the door. Mrs. Hartley will take you through. The latch clicked and suddenly they were in another world. The air was different, stale, faintly metallic, with an undertone of old paper and disinfectant. The corridors stretched narrow and close, their walls painted a weary cream that peeled in strips like sunburnt skin. Dehumidifiers hummed somewhere in the distance, a mechanical heartbeat keeping the ghosts of the Blitz at bay. Tuppence paused, glancing back at the sealed door. There's always something unsettling about going underground, isn't there? Like walking into memory. Or a trapdoor, Tommy muttered, but there was a spark of amusement in his eyes. From a side corridor emerged Mrs. Hartley, a trim woman in her late 50s with hair pinned in an efficient twist. Her uniform, navy skirt, white blouse, sensible shoes, gave her a look of brisk competence. She smiled the way guides do, polished, professional, and faintly tired. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, welcome. You're most punctual. I trust you brought your curiosity? Tuppence returned the smile. It's about the only thing I never misplace. Mrs. Hartley led the way, her heels tapping with precise rhythm. We've a small group tonight, special clearance for a research project. This way, please. They passed through a succession of narrow chambers, the cabinet room, with its scarred table and stubby telephones, the Prime Minister's bedroom, a small cell-like space with an iron-framed bed and a clock frozen at 3:10. Tommy ran a finger along a cracked map on the wall. I dare say Churchill himself touched this. Mrs. Hartley allowed herself a faint smile. He touched everything, Mr. Beresford. Papers, tempers and nerves alike. In the adjoining passage stood 3 other visitors. Mr. Lionel Greaves, in a tailored grey suit that spoke of politics rather than scholarship, looked as though he'd stepped from a committee meeting. Ah, our civilians have arrived. Splendid. We're making a little history of history, you know. Tuppence thought his enthusiasm slightly too polished. Next to him, a young woman in spectacles balanced a clipboard against her arm, Dr. Pauline Liddell, who introduced herself in a quick, distracted manner. Archivist. I'm cataloguing wartime requisitions. There's a ledger from 1944, one entry missing, oddly enough. The final figure, standing a little apart, was an American, tall, spare, with silver hair and the calm gaze of a man who watched more than he spoke. "Ezra Pike," he said, shaking Tommy's hand with quiet firmness. "Smithsonian liaison. Strictly archival, I promise." "Strictly?" Tuppence asked, her tone mild but curious. He smiled thinly. "Well, perhaps mostly." Mrs. Hartley resumed her practiced narration. "You're standing in what was once the beating heart of Britain's war effort. Each phone, each chart, each note on a pin was part of the machinery of victory." As they walked, Tuppence noticed details the others ignored: the faint scuff of polished shoes across freshly cleaned floors, a subtle whiff of lavender mingled with Lysol, and, caught in a hinge, a thread of dark blue wool, almost invisible. She plucked it free and slipped it into her pocket. Dr. Liddell stopped by a shelf of ration ledgers. "Someone's been at this," she murmured, frowning at a gap between volumes. "File 1944 7A, missing." "Paper rot, most likely," Greaves offered. "You academics love a drama where there's only decay." "Decay doesn't tear pages," she replied, voice cool. Tuppence's eyes flicked toward Mrs. Hartley, who had paused just a second too long before continuing her tour. "Perhaps I can check the preservation logs later," the guide said smoothly. The group moved onward. Pipes ran along the ceiling, sweating faintly. Every turn looked like the last, a labyrinth carved in concrete and memory. "Does anyone else find it strange," Tommy said lightly, "that these corridors feel as though they still expect orders to come through the telephones?" "Not strange," Mrs. Hartley said, without looking back. "Merely accurate." They reached the famous map room. Its glass-topped tables glowed faintly under the yellowed bulbs. Coloured pins still marked long-ended campaigns. The smell of stale air mingled with the faint sweetness of lavender polish. Too recent, thought Tuppence, to belong entirely to preservation. Mrs. Hartley hesitated, just a heartbeat, before inserting a key into the door. The lock gleamed unnaturally bright beside its duller companions, new metal against old brass. "Replaced recently?" Tuppence asked, casual as tea-time chat. "Maintenance upgrade," Hartley replied quickly, pushing open the door. "Humidity control." The room beyond was still and cold. The great map of Europe stretched across the wall, tiny flags frozen mid-battle. Beneath them, rows of desks held neatly stacked files, typewriters under dust covers and pencils sharpened decades ago yet ready for use. Greaves clasped his hands. "Splendid. Imagine the optics. Heritage, endurance, leadership. I can see the headline now. From Blitz to Brilliance, Britain's Hidden Heart." Pike's voice came softly from behind him. "History's heart, Mr. Greaves, doesn't always beat to the tune of good publicity." The junior minister bristled. "We all serve our causes, Mr. Pike." Tuppence drifted toward a small alcove near the wall. A faint draught brushed her cheek. She knelt and found a gap behind a cabinet where the baseboard didn't quite meet the floor. "Odd," she murmured. "A vent?" Mrs. Hartley appeared at her side almost too quickly. "Air circulation. These old systems were ingenious." Her smile was steady, but her hands, Tuppence noticed, were perfectly still, folded in front of her. A woman trained to control tremors. "Shall we?" Greaves interrupted cheerily. "The lower archive, Mrs. Hartley. You promised us something rarely seen." A flicker of hesitation, swiftly masked. "Of course." They followed her down a narrower stair, the air growing cooler, the concrete damp. The bulbs flickered, throwing their shadows long against the walls. "This area isn't open to the public," Mrs. Hartley said. "We use it for restoration work." "Or concealment," Tuppence whispered, so low only Tommy heard. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small chamber. The smell of the place was sharp, Lysol again, and something faintly floral. Tuppence couldn't tell whether it comforted or unsettled her. Pike trailed a hand along the wall. "Still feels alive down here," he murmured. "You can almost hear the Morse code through the bricks." Dr. Liddell was muttering to herself again. If 7A was requisitioned in 44, the supplementary ledger should be here. She tapped a shelf, frowned, and turned away, defeated. "Perhaps," said Greaves lightly, "someone decided the war had enough secrets without preserving one more." Tuppence's gaze swept the dim chamber. Pipes ran like veins overhead. A low humming came from behind one wall, as though the bunker itself were breathing. Tommy took her hand. "This is it," he said quietly. "Beneath the map room. exactly as the letter said. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the weak light. And if secrets tend to keep appointments, then something or someone will be waiting. Above them, the faintest echo of the city's life. Distant traffic, footsteps, the steady drip of rain through gratings reminded them how far below ground they stood. The walls seemed to listen. Mrs. Hartley straightened her collar. "We'll continue the tour shortly," she said briskly, though her voice carried the faintest tremor. "For now, I suggest we all stay together." Tuppence met Tommy's gaze. The thrill of the chase, old, familiar, irresistible, had begun. The air was colder now, as though the bunker had drawn a slow breath and held it. The hum of dehumidifiers seemed distant. Somewhere above, a pipe dripped in measured time. Mrs. Hartley led the way along a narrow side corridor, her torch slicing through the dimness, the others following in uneasy silence. They turned into a little-used alcove lined with rusted communication panels. The smell of damp insulation and polish mingled with something sharper, carbolic, unmistakable. Mrs. Hartley stopped short. A metal hatch low on the wall stood ajar, the screws along its edge crusted with old paint except for two freshly stripped. "That shouldn't be open," she said sharply. "Maintenance, perhaps. Electricians were down here today." Tommy crouched, peering into the gap. If they were, they left more than spanners. He took the torch from her hand, ducked under the ledge and froze. Good Lord! Tuppence, leaning over his shoulder, saw it too, the slumped figure of a man inside the crawl space, one arm curled awkwardly beneath him, the other stretched outward, clutching a ring of antique keys. The light caught a small civvy badge on his lapel, dulled with age, and a smear of dark against the concrete. His mac was creased, shoes too clean for such surroundings, and his face, what little they could see of it, was pressed into the cold floor. Mrs. Hartley's hand flew to her mouth. Oh heavens, that's Harold Kersey. Dr. Liddell stepped closer, her voice trembling. "The one who used to run errands down here. He came to me last month about wartime notes. I thought he was harmless." Ezra Pike's face hardened, unreadable. "He doesn't look harmless now." The American's calm tone made the words sting. Greaves cleared his throat, ever the official. "This is a restricted site. Until the proper authorities are informed, I must insist we, contain the situation. No photographs, no statements." "Containment?" Tuppence repeated, straightening. "He's not leaking radiation, Mr. Greaves. He's dead." Tommy examined the ring of keys. Antique by the look of it. "See the wards? Probably belong to the old storage bays." "Don't touch them," Mrs. Hartley warned. "They'll need to be logged." Tuppence's eyes travelled over the body. The soles of the shoes were barely scuffed. One lace was brown, the other black. The wristwatch had stopped at exactly 7:12. Nearby, a thin groove traced across the dust, as though something narrow and metallic had been dragged away. "The timepiece may tell its tale," Tommy murmured. "Or the person who stopped it," said Tuppence. Dr. Liddell was kneeling by the hatch, pale as chalk. "He was frightened," she whispered. "When I saw him last week, he said there were people who wanted old papers kept hidden. I laughed." "You shouldn't blame yourself," Tuppence said gently. "He might have laughed too, until someone silenced him." Pike crouched beside the crawl space. "He's been dead only a few hours. Look at the condensation on the concrete." Greaves shifted, uncomfortable. "Best call the Home Office before this turns into a headline. We can't have rumours of corpses under Churchill's bunker." "We can't have corpses anywhere," Tommy said crisply. "Tuppence, ring Inspector Grant. He owes us for that Sussex affair." Mrs. Hartley started. "Police? I thought perhaps—" "That we'd cover it up." Tuppence's smile was thin. "We're many things, Mrs. Hartley, but discreet undertakers aren't among them." There was a telephone in the adjoining rest niche. Tuppence brushed aside a dust sheet, revealing a small table with a cracked tea glass and an enamel tin. The glass bore a perfect crimson print of lipstick. Victory red, the post-war shade every girl had once coveted, discontinued decades ago. She turned it in the lamplight. A lady's visit, recent enough for the mark to gleam. "Tourist souvenir," Greaves muttered. "Tourists don't drink tea in staff corners after hours," she replied. The dialing tone crackled. Inspector Grant answered with his usual growl. Within minutes, his measured baritone promised arrival. "Stay put," he told her, "and don't let your ministerial friend tidy the evidence." Tuppence replaced the receiver and rejoined the group. Inspector Grant is on his way, so if anyone has been concealing skeletons, metaphorical or otherwise, they've a short grace. Silence followed, broken only by the whir of the dehumidifier. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Mrs. Hartley looked up sharply. That shouldn't happen. The circuits were replaced last month. The bulbs dimmed again, once, twice, then went out altogether. A darkness thick as velvet filled the corridor. Somewhere metal clanged, a door, or a dropped tool. Tommy's voice rang steady. "Nobody move. Stay where you are." Feet scraped on concrete, one set, quick and purposeful, retreating. "Who's there?" Greaves barked. No answer. A rattle of keys, a low thud, then stillness. Tuppence felt her way toward the alcove wall. "Tommy, the torch!" He flicked it on. The beam wavered, caught dust in suspension. Mrs. Hartley stood frozen. Dr. Liddell clutched her clipboard like a shield. Pike was by the doorway, expression grim. Greaves was mopping sweat from his temple with an immaculate handkerchief. But the crawl space was empty now of one crucial detail. The ring of antique keys was gone. Mrs. Hartley gave a strangled gasp. I saw them in his hand a moment ago." "Someone didn't wish them catalogued," said Pike quietly. Greaves tried to recover his authority. "Could be a loose hook, the jolt of the blackout." "No hook," Tommy interrupted. "Look at the dust. A fresh smear where the keys lay. Someone lifted them while we were in darkness." "And shut that low door," Tuppence added. "The sound came from there." Mrs. Hartley's face had gone chalk white. "That door leads to the lower maintenance run, disused since the 40s. "Disused things," said Tuppence, "have a way of being terribly useful when one wishes to vanish." A low murmur rippled through the group, uneasy, half-whispered theories, each less convincing than the last. Tommy straightened. "Well, the good inspector will enjoy this. A body, a power cut, missing keys, and half of Whitehall's ghosts walking the passages." Greaves shot him a glare. "Let's not dramatise matters, Beresford." Tuppence tilted her head. "On the contrary, Mr. Greaves, I suspect the drama has only just begun." They waited for the police in tense quiet. The emergency bulbs flickered back to life at last, casting a sickly yellow glow. The corpse remained as before, except for the loosened fold of his coat, beneath which a small scrap of paper protruded. Tuppence leaned in, careful not to disturb the body, and read the faint pencil marks. "Map room tonight, HK." She looked up at Mrs. Hartley. "So you knew him after all?" The woman's lips trembled. "Yes. He came back to offer stories for the exhibition. He'd been drinking, I thought. Said he found something that should never have been buried." Pike's eyes glinted. "Buried, and now, perhaps, unearthed." The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor above. Firm, official, relief mingled with dread. Tuppence looked once more at the crawl space, its shadowed corners giving nothing away. The smell of carbolic hung heavier now, threaded with that faint sweetness she couldn't quite name. It was the scent, she thought, of secrets scrubbed clean too late. The bunker's briefing room, once a place of strategy and sleepless nights, now hosted a different kind of battle. Its green baize table was ringed by uneasy faces, the hum of overhead lights underscoring the sense of confinement. Inspector Grant stood at the head of the table, trenchcoat draped over a chair, notebook open and pencil poised. His voice, brisk and clipped, carried the final authority of Scotland Yard. "Until we've determined how Mr. Harold Kersey met his end, no one leaves these premises. I've stationed men at both stairwells." The announcement met silence. A drop of water ticked in the corner from a leaky pipe. Grant's eyes swept the group. "Now, some of you I already know by reputation." His gaze flicked toward Tommy and Tuppence, and a thin smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "The Beresfords. I'd hoped retirement meant retirement." Tuppence returned the smile with gentle irony. "And deprive you of our company, Inspector? I couldn't dream of it." Grant grunted. "Just so long as you remember I'm running this inquiry." Tommy leaned back. "We'll only interfere when absolutely necessary." That earned a faint snort from Grant before he turned to business. "Mrs. Hartley, you were nearest the corridor when the lights failed. Let's begin with you." The guide's composure was studied. I had gone to fetch first aid supplies from the storage alcove. I heard a noise, metallic, perhaps a tool dropped, but when I returned, the lights came back. Anyone see you leave? No. Or return? She hesitated. No, but I assure you I was gone less than a minute. Tuppence tilted her head slightly, observing. A minute is a long time in darkness, Mrs. Hartley. The woman said nothing, fingers tightening on her handbag strap. Grant shifted his attention. Dr. Liddell? The historian adjusted her spectacles. I was at the work table, copying a log entry. I never moved. Grant took the notebook she offered. The page was neatly ruled, the ink still fresh. But when he tilted it toward the light, faint impressions bled through the paper, ghostly shapes of figures and words that didn't match the visible text. You write with quite a heavy hand, he remarked. She flushed. I reused a page from an earlier list. Wartime thrift. Or wartime secrets, murmured Tuppence. Dr. Liddell pressed her lips together and said nothing. Mr. Greaves, Grant continued, turning to the politician, whose sleek hair and tailored suit looked oddly theatrical amid the bunker grime. Your turn. Greaves offered a tight smile. I stepped into the side corridor to telephone the permanent secretary. I felt the blackout occur, but thought it prudent to stay where I was until the power returned. Tommy lifted an eyebrow. Telephone the permanent secretary? At 9 o'clock in the evening. I keep late hours, Mr. Beresford. The service of one's country never ends. Tuppence glanced at the wall-mounted phone near the corridor door. Perhaps, but this line doesn't. It's disconnected after 6. Greaves stiffened. How do you know that? I asked Mrs. Hartley earlier. She was quite firm about schedules. Grant noted the flush rising in Greaves's neck. We'll verify it, he said coolly. Pike, the American, leaned on his elbow, casual but watchful. For what it's worth, I was exploring, orienting myself, as I said before. I opened a few wrong doors. Old habits die hard. Old habits? Asked Tuppence. Curiosity. Occupational hazard of a museum man. Grant's pencil scratched. So, we have one wandering scholar, one over-dedicated minister, one guide off for plasters, and one archivist writing invisible sums. I'll try to contain my enthusiasm. He turned to the constable guarding the door. Search Kersey's effects. The constable stepped forward, setting a tray on the table. From the dead man's pockets came a sugar ration stub, a tarnished civvy badge, a matchbook from a Soho cafe, and a folded slip of paper. Grant unfolded it carefully. Well, this is a familiar phrase. Tuppence leaned forward to read. The line, "Kites rise highest against the wind," was written in the same cramped hand as the letter that had brought them here, complete with the wrong preposition. The same misquotation, she murmured, twice made by ear, not by eye. Meaning? Asked Grant. Someone who learned it through speech, not text, a person accustomed to listening to others rather than reading, perhaps a secretary, a clerk, or someone who took dictation. Mrs. Hartley's hands twitched. Or anyone with an imperfect memory. Tuppence smiled mildly. Possibly, but habits of speech linger longer than memory. Grant folded the paper, his brow furrowed. And this? He lifted a small brass tag from the tray. The engraving read, B. Lower North, File 7. Tommy whistled softly. Lower North again. We're circling the same drain. Pike tapped his pen against the table. If that's an archive bay, I could help locate it. Grant nodded reluctantly. We'll come to that. For now, Colonel Bligh has just arrived. Perhaps he can clarify what Kersey was doing down here in the first place. The door opened to admit a tall man with a soldier's posture and a face carved from habit. Colonel Arthur Bligh, retired signals officer, gave a stiff nod to Grant and another to Mrs. Hartley, who looked briefly startled. You knew Kersey? Grant asked. During the war, yes. He was a runner in signals. Capable chap, but too inquisitive. Always poking where he wasn't sent. Did you maintain contact? Not in 20 years. Bligh removed his gloves with deliberate precision. Why the question? Because he seems to have died chasing something left over from those years, Tuppence said. Something marked File 7. Bligh's expression didn't change, but his hand paused mid-motion. That designation means nothing to me. Mrs. Hartley spoke quickly. I remember hearing his name. Colonel Bligh was stationed near Kersey for a time. Grant's eyes flicked toward her. "You said that already, Mrs. Hartley." She lowered her gaze. "I only meant it might explain his presence here." Tuppence caught the flicker between them, as if an old understanding had been unearthed and hastily buried again. Grant closed his notebook with a snap. "Enough. Until the medical examiner clears the body, this is a suspicious death under wartime secrecy protocols. No one leaves, no one touches anything without permission." He gestured to the constable. "Search the adjoining corridors. We'll begin at the service stair where those drag marks were found." The group filed out, their footsteps echoing unevenly down the dim corridor. Dust lay thick in corners, stirred only by recent movement. Tuppence knelt beside a scuffed patch near the wall. "Look at this, Tommy." In the fine dust was a distinct heel print with a small triangular chip missing from its outer edge. Nearby, faint streaks traced the outline of something narrow and heavy, perhaps a case, dragged toward the stairwell. "Whoever it was moved fast," Tommy murmured, and didn't bother covering tracks. Grant crouched beside them. "We'll cast the print. Unique mark, easy to match." He straightened, glancing down the stairwell. "Leads to the lower bays." "The same direction as file 7, Tuppence said thoughtfully. Greaves cleared his throat. "Inspector, if I might remind you, these premises are government property. We must consider the diplomatic implications." Grant silenced him with a look. "I'm considering a murder, Mr. Greaves. You can keep your diplomacy for Parliament." Pike's laugh was brief and dry. "Reminds me why I like your countrymen, Inspector. Efficient." "Efficiency," said Grant, "depends on cooperation." He turned to the group. "You'll all stay in quarters on this level. Meals and messages are suspended. Anyone found below without escort will answer directly to me." He started back toward the briefing room, leaving them in the dim corridor. Tuppence glanced at Tommy, her expression thoughtful. "Wartime habits," she said softly. "They don't fade, they just sleep, until someone shakes the siren again." He smiled wryly. "Then let's hope we're awake before the next raid starts." Behind them, the echo of their steps blended with the bunker's low hum, as if the walls themselves were listening, remembering. The air in the underground warren was close and heavy, carrying that faint, stale scent of time, old paper, machine oil, and something else, antiseptic and lavender, like the ghosts of hospitals. The hum of dehumidifiers filled the silence as if the past itself were still being preserved, one dry breath at a time. Tuppence Beresford sat across from Dr. Pauline Liddell at a narrow trestle table, its surface scored with decades of pencil marks and cigarette burns. A shaded lamp cast both women into a fragile pool of light, while Tommy leaned against the doorframe, listening but saying nothing. "You wanted to speak privately?" Tuppence said, her tone gentle but probing. Liddell hesitated. "I've risked enough already by mentioning it at all. That docket I said was missing. It isn't ration paperwork, not really. It references something else entirely, a wartime supplementary ledger." Tuppence's eyes glimmered. "A ledger?" "Yes. Codename, Bulldog." Liddell's voice dropped as though the walls might still carry to listening ears. "It was used to funnel payments, bribes, informants, shipments that needed greasing. Perfectly ordinary by the standards of wartime, but dangerous in peacetime. It names people still living." Tommy let out a low whistle. "A scandal ledger." Liddell nodded. "It shouldn't exist anymore, but every file leaves an echo. Kersey was chasing that echo, and I think he found something. I only wanted to confirm whether Bulldog was real. Now," she clasped her hands tightly, "now someone is killing for it." Tuppence's expression softened. "You were the first to declare your docket missing." "I know what that sounds like," Liddell said quickly, "but I only realized the connection afterward. The entry number matches a 1944 notation, funds transferred via Bulldog 17C. I shouldn't have said anything in front of the others." "No," said Tuppence, "you shouldn't, but I'm glad you did." From the doorway, Tommy spoke up. "There's still the question of motive. A ledger like that could ruin careers, but it's 30 years too late for most." Liddell looked away. Not for those who built their lives on silence. A soft knock interrupted them. Ezra Pike stood just outside, his expression cautious but not apologetic. "Mind if I step in?" Tommy gestured him forward. "Depends whether you're here to add light or more fog." Pike smiled faintly. "A bit of both, I suppose." Since we're trading truths, yes, I'm with the Smithsonian. My job's to trace the post-war transit of sensitive archives. One of those whispers concerned your bulldog ledger. Tuppence arched an eyebrow. America has an interest in British ghosts? Mutual history, Pike replied smoothly. A microfilm copy of that ledger was supposedly sent to Washington in 1945, returned here in 47, then gone. Officially destroyed, unofficially misplaced. Rumour says someone held onto it as insurance. Kersey? Tommy asked. Could be. Maybe he found out the bulldog file still existed, or thought he could sell the knowledge. He was in and out of these tunnels for weeks, nosing about with that old badge of his. My guess is he wanted to sell the keys, not the secret. Someone else wanted both, Tuppence murmured. Mrs. Hartley appeared in the doorway, pale but composed, her guide's badge glinting faintly in the dim light. Inspector Grant requests we remain in the upper rooms, but if you want to see where Kersey might have gone, I can take you now, before it's sealed off. Tommy looked at Tuppence, who nodded once. The descent to the disused first aid station was quiet, except for the faint scuff of their shoes on concrete. A low hum from the overhead pipes made the air vibrate. Mrs. Hartley unlocked the rusted door and swung it inward. The smell met them immediately, sharp, clinical, and oddly nostalgic. Lavender and antiseptic. Rows of cupboards lined the small room, each labelled with fading stencils. Dressings, morphine, splints. A single metal cot sat folded against the wall. The cupboards, though empty, bore recent dust disturbances, faint ovals where jars or tins had stood. After the war, this was used for storage, Mrs. Hartley said. Mostly exhibits now. We keep it locked. Tuppence ran her fingers along the shelf edges. The scent was the same she had noticed before, on the letter, in the crawl space, even on the tea glass by the body. Who keeps lavender polish in a bunker? She murmured. Her hand stopped at a small tin shoved to the back of a shelf. She drew it out carefully. The label was cracked but legible. Victory Red, 1943 edition. Tommy gave a low chuckle. Lipstick. Well, that's one way to brighten morale. Or mark ownership, Tuppence said. It's the same shade found on the glass. Pike leaned closer. Could be coincidence. Tuppence smiled faintly. Coincidence tends to fade under pressure. She moved to the far wall where an old stretcher hung suspended by leather straps. A thin layer of dust coated everything, except for one rectangular patch about the size of a file folder. She brushed her gloved hand across it. The dust pattern was unmistakable. Something flat and slim had been hidden there recently, then removed. Tommy whistled softly. Looks like someone's been playing hide-and-seek. Or housekeeping, Pike muttered. Tuppence's eyes caught another detail, a pencil scrawl on the wall just above the stretcher. At first glance it was gibberish, random letters strung in uneven columns. But as she stepped back, the spacing formed a pattern she recognized instantly. Dots and dashes. Morse, she breathed. Old-fashioned, but apt. Can you read it? Tommy asked. She traced the symbols lightly with her finger. LEDGER-SAFE. Her voice slowed. B, lower, north, 7. Pike's brow furrowed. B, lower north, file 7, the tag found in Kersey's pocket. The same, Tuppence said. He must have found this message before someone else did, or left it for us. Grant's voice echoed faintly from above, shouting orders to constables. Somewhere in the distance the sound of sirens drifted through the ventilation shafts, a reminder that London still lived and breathed above them. Tuppence turned the lipstick tin over thoughtfully. Mrs. Hartley, you've been most helpful. You said this room was locked. Yes. And yet, the dust tells a different story. The woman's eyes flickered. You think I... Tuppence smiled with perfect politeness. I think whoever entered had a key identical to yours. Whether by permission or theft remains to be seen. Mrs. Hartley said nothing, but her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the cupboard door. Back in the corridor, the bunker seemed narrower, the concrete pressing closer around them. The hum of air through the ducts grew louder, more insistent. Tommy glanced at the flickering lights. I don't like this place. It feels built for secrets, not people. Tuppence nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. Think, Tommy. The Morse message, the tag, the trail through the dust. Whoever moved that file has a head start, and they're still inside. Pike adjusted his glasses, uneasy. B lower north. That's the archive wing beneath the communications floor. You'd need clearance and 2 sets of keys, which exist. In theory, the military retained one, the ministry another. And Mrs. Hartley worked under both. Tommy exhaled. So she could get in, or someone close to her could. Above them, a faint metallic clang echoed through the pipes, followed by a rushing vibration that made the lamps sway. For a moment it sounded almost like distant footsteps moving through the ventilation shafts. Tuppence looked up, listening. "The bunker's not keeping enemies out anymore," she said softly. "It's keeping something in." The sirens above London wailed again, fainter now, dissolving into the thrum of the generators. Pike gave a short laugh, uneasy. "You English have a talent for understatement." Tuppence smiled, her tone dry. "We also have a talent for finishing what others try to bury." She turned toward the stairway that led down to the lower levels. The shadows swallowed her figure as she spoke over her shoulder. "Come along, Tommy. File 7 is waiting." The bunker's heart seemed to beat slower as they descended, each echo stretching thin before snapping against the walls. The service stair was narrow and steep, built for utility rather than comfort. Iron steps slick with condensation, a single bulb swinging faintly overhead. Inspector Grant's torch swept across the walls, its circle of light darting like a restless thought. "This passage isn't on the public plans," he muttered. "Bypasses the visitor route entirely." "Which makes it perfect," Tuppence replied, "for anyone wishing to move unseen." The air grew cooler with every turn of the spiral. The scent of damp metal mingled with disinfectant, faint but insistent. On the second landing, Tommy stopped short. "Hold up," he said, crouching. Something glinted near his boot. He lifted it carefully. A small brass shank snapped cleanly off at the base. The remnants of teeth still caught the light. Grant examined it. Old warded key, same kind that would fit the map room's older locks. "And recently broken," Tuppence observed. "See how bright the metal is at the snap. Someone tried to force a door, and failed." Her gaze drifted to the nearest one, marked in fading paint. Electrical. The keyhole bore fresh scratches, raw against the corroded surface. "Someone was desperate to get inside," she murmured. "But why?" Grant pressed the latch experimentally. It held firm. "If it leads to the circuits, it could control the blackout we had earlier." "Or cover a flight," said Tommy. "Darkness hides all sins." Tuppence knelt beside the doorframe, examining the floor. There, a faint half-print in the dust, the distinctive wedge of a triangular heel. The edge was blurred, as though smeared with moisture. She touched the mark and brought her fingers to her nose. "Disinfectant," she said. "Same scent as before. Whoever left this trail wanted to be clean, but left perfume behind." Grant's brows knitted. A curious killer, tidy and scented. "Or," Tuppence replied softly, "a nurse." They exchanged a glance but said nothing more. The stair twisted again before releasing them into a low vault where brick arches supported sweating pipes. The air felt thick, almost living. The feeble bulbs overhead buzzed against the damp. Somewhere deeper, a faint tick-tick echoed. Slow, deliberate, rhythmical. Grant's hand went to his revolver. "What's that?" Tommy cocked his head. "Could be machinery." Tuppence frowned. Or not. She followed the sound to a dripping pipe that emptied into a zinc bucket. Each droplet struck with clockwork precision, and with each strike came a soft, metallic response. She bent closer. "It's the bucket. Something's balancing on the rim." Her torch beam found it. A folded cloth, white but faintly stained, stamped with faded blue letters. "St. Jude's Hospital, 1942. "Hospital linen," she murmured, "and not left here by accident." A shadow moved at the far end of the vault. Mrs. Hartley appeared, breathless, with Greaves and Ezra Pike trailing behind. "My apologies," she said. "Mr. Greaves insisted we follow. He thought you might require assistance." "Or supervision," Grant said dryly. Pike nodded toward the cloth. "St. Jude's, you say?" "We shipped half their surplus through government channels after the war. Found its way everywhere, from barracks to bakeries." "Perhaps," said Tuppence, "but this piece has found its way here, precisely under a leak that's been dripping for weeks. Someone chose this spot." Mrs. Hartley's expression didn't flicker. "I assure you, Mrs. Beresford, such linens were common currency." "True," Tuppence said gently. "Still, it's an odd place for nostalgia." Grant's torch caught movement in a side passage. Pike had wandered off, stooping under a low arch. "Over here," he called. They joined him to find a small alcove lined with decaying files and rusted boxes. One of them, a steel cash box, lay pried open, its hasp twisted. Inside was only dust. "Empty," Pike said. "Whoever was here came prepared." Grant ran his hand over the lid. "Tool marks, fresh ones, and look here, chalk." Drawn on the floor beside the box was an arrow, crudely scrawled, pointing deeper into the warren. Tommy whistled. "A decoy trail?" Tuppence crouched. "Or a warning. Either way, it tells us our quarry enjoys a bit of theatre." Grant swore under his breath. "We'll follow it." They moved as one, boots scuffing through layers of dust and paper fragments. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily. The temperature dropped further, their breath misted. Halfway down the passage, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then half of them died with a sharp pop. "Blasted fuses," Grant muttered. The darkness deepened to a murky half-light. Pipes gleamed like ribs, every sound stretched unnaturally. "Stay close," Tommy said quietly. A sudden movement, just a blur at the edge of vision, shot across the corridor ahead. "Stop!" Grant barked, lunging forward. Tommy gave chase, his footsteps echoing wildly. He caught only glimpses, a sleeve, the flutter of a skirt, the faint clack of heels on stone. Then, silence. The corridor forked in two directions, both veined with draughts that made the lamp sway. He stopped, breathing hard. "Gone," he muttered. When he retraced his steps, the others were gathered near the vault entrance. Greaves was rubbing his wrist furiously. "Someone shoved me," he said indignantly. "In the dark, came out of nowhere." "Which direction?" Grant demanded. Greaves gestured vaguely. "That way, I think. Toward the lower tunnel." Mrs. Hartley stood a few paces behind him, pale and trembling. "This is madness. We should return to the main level and wait for reinforcements." Tuppence's sharp eyes caught another detail. "Mrs. Hartley, where's your handbag?" She blinked, startled. I set it down to help with the torch when the lights went." "Where?" "By the wall, I believe." Grant swung his torch to the spot. Nothing, only the dark smear of a boot sole and the faint shine of a snapped strap buckle. Tommy met Tuppence's gaze. "Vanished." Pike frowned. "Could have been dropped in the confusion." Tuppence shook her head. "A sensible woman never mislays her bag, unless she needs to part with something inside." The silence that followed was taut. Even Greaves stopped rubbing his wrist. "Search the passage," Grant ordered. "If she left it, we'll find it." But they found nothing except the echoes of their own movements, and a single discarded glove lying near the bucket, the twin of none that anyone claimed. When they finally regrouped, Grant leaned against the wall, jaw set. "Whoever we're chasing knows these tunnels. They used the blackout to move and confuse. Could be our killer, or an accomplice." Pike folded his arms. "Or one of your own men from earlier patrols." Grant's glare silenced him. Tuppence turned the glove over in her hand. It was soft kid leather, faintly perfumed with lavender and carbolic. She spoke almost to herself. "Same scent as before. Whoever handled the keys, and the body, handled this too." "Then Mrs. Hartley may have more to answer for than she admits," Tommy said quietly. Grant nodded grimly. "We'll question her again once we're topside. For now, we secure the vault." As they retraced their steps, the flickering lights struggled back to life. In the harsh glow, everything looked ordinary again, pipes, boxes, shadows, but the air held the weight of unseen motion. Tuppence paused at the base of the stair, glancing once more into the darkness below. "It's strange," she said softly. "Secrets never stay buried. They shift like water through stone, and when they rise again, someone always pays the price." Tommy placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Let's make sure it isn't us." They began to climb, the echo of their footsteps fading into the hum of machinery. Far below, unseen in the gloom, a single droplet fell into the zinc bucket with a soft, patient tick, the bunker's own heartbeat, counting down to the next revelation. The bunker's lower levels exhaled a stillness that felt older than silence, dense, archival, as though time itself had been boxed and catalogued. Their footsteps echoed softly across a floor laid with red quarry tiles, dulled by decades of use. Pipes hissed above them like whispering serpents. Grant's torch beam cut through a corridor of narrow shelving bays. "B lower north," he read aloud from a painted sign half flaking on the wall. "Here we are." Rows of metal shelving stretched into the gloom, each labelled in a clerk's hand so precise it might have been etched. File numbers, case tags, dusty ledgers. A faint smell of paper rot mingled with the dry tang of old ink. Tuppence ran her gloved fingers over the tags as they passed. "It's like walking through the bones of a memory," she said softly. "Let's hope this one still remembers how to tell the truth," Tommy murmured. They reached the end of the row where the label File 7 had been neatly stenciled on a wooden divider, but the slot was empty. "Gone," Grant muttered. "And recently, by the look of it." Tuppence crouched. The edges of the shelf were unnaturally clean, no cobwebs, no dust. She traced the smoothness with her fingertips. Someone's wiped it down, not just lifted the file, but polished away its ghost. On the floor below, a scrap of waxed paper clung to a patch of damp concrete. She picked it up delicately. The surface bore a faint circular indent, spiral grooves, almost like fingerprints, but too even. "Microfilm reel," she said, "or something meant to suggest one." Grant frowned. So Kersey wasn't chasing smoke after all. But if it's gone, where the devil is it now? "Perhaps the better question," Tommy said, is, was it ever here? Grant turned, his voice clipped. "We'll have everyone searched, discreetly." Ezra Pike raised an eyebrow. "Including myself, Inspector?" "Especially yourself, Mr. Pike. You seem to know a lot about microfilm for a museum man." Pike smiled faintly. "During the war, we used it to hide troop lists in postcards. You could roll miles of truth into a pencil stub." That remark made Tuppence glance around, eyes darting across their small circle. 4 pens, 4 possibilities. Greaves's heavy fountain pen gleamed in his pocket, ministerial, ostentatious, and oddly out of place amid the dust. Dr. Liddell held a mechanical pencil, slim as her wrist and far too clean for this damp. Mrs. Hartley's pen, the practical black sort with a cracked cap, rested in her handbag, now retrieved and held tightly at her side. Pike's own instrument was a fine American model, gold-trimmed and unsmudged. Tommy caught Tuppence's look and gave a slight nod. The thought passed between them silently. Any one of these could hide a roll of film no wider than a matchstick. Grant motioned to a constable. "Collect their pens. Return them afterward." The protest came from Greaves first. "This is outrageous. You can't simply—" "I can, sir," Grant said curtly. "And I will." The pens were gathered, examined, and returned. No microfilm, no hidden compartment. Only the faint clink of metal disappointment. "Blast," muttered Grant. "If it's not in their pockets, where is it?" Tuppence's gaze drifted beyond the group to a nearby display case. Inside were relics from the bunker's wartime years, ration books, armbands, a gas mask box. She remembered seeing them before on a guided tour. Every visitor did. But now, something seemed different. The gas mask box's lid sat fractionally ajar. She crossed the room, fingertips brushing the cold glass. The latch bore a faint modern scrape, fresh against its corroded metal. "Inspector," she said softly. "May I?" Grant nodded. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a single pamphlet, "Keep Calm and Carry On," yellowed and curled, but the felt lining beneath was pressed in 2 shallow ovals, as though something had rested there until recently. "Pressure marks," she murmured. "Something narrow. Not a gas mask, certainly." Grant bent over her shoulder. "Could have been a reel." "Or pages," Tuppence said quietly. Tommy frowned. "Pages?" "Someone wanted us to believe in microfilm. But what if the Bulldog ledger was never copied at all? Suppose Kersey chased the wrong legend. Suppose it was always paper." Pike tilted his head. "A double bluff. Very British." Mrs. Hartley clasped her handbag tighter. "Then where are these pages now?" Tuppence's answer was interrupted by the sharp slam of a distant door. The sound rolled through the vaults like a gunshot muffled by distance. Everyone froze. Grant barked, "Stay here!" and strode off, torch cutting through the dark. The echoes played tricks, one door closing, another answering. When he returned, his expression was grim. No one there. But something's moving in these tunnels. I'll have men stationed at each exit. Tuppence had knelt again, scanning the floor near a vent grill. A scrap of paper caught her eye, wedged just under the metal lip. She teased it free with a pencil tip. It was a strip no wider than her finger, rolled tight and tied with thread. Morse, she said, unfolding it carefully. Dots and dashes, faintly penciled. Grant handed her his notebook. Translate it. Her eyes moved quickly across the code. NOTFILMPAGES. She looked up. Not film, pages. Pike exhaled softly. So our thief wishes to correct our course, either a taunt or a hint. Dr. Liddell's eyes gleamed with sudden recollection. Pages. I remember something. A reference in the 1945 Ledger Index. Pages retained under medical care. It struck me as odd at the time. Medical care? Tommy echoed. You mean hospital custody? Yes, or storage with medical equipment. The phrasing was bureaucratic. I assumed it referred to disposal. Tuppence straightened. Or concealment. Think of it, Tommy. If someone hid the bulldog ledger under the guise of medical inventory, where would it have gone? Hospital supplies, linen, disinfectant. St. Jude's, he finished. All eyes turned to Mrs. Hartley. Her composure was perfect, but a faint pulse beat in her temple. St. Jude's was one of many hospitals requisitioned for storage during the war. I oversaw deliveries then. Everyone did their part. You requisitioned medical stores, Tuppence said softly. And later, you worked here. The same woman on both ends of the chain. Mrs. Hartley's voice was even. I followed orders, Mrs. Beresford, nothing more. Grant studied her closely. Orders from whom? The War Office, and afterward the Ministry. And Harold Kersey? A pause. He was a messenger, nothing more. He delivered files, sealed crates. I hadn't seen him in decades until this week. Yet he died with your initials in his pocket, Grant said. She flinched, almost imperceptibly. Coincidence. Tuppence held her gaze. There's little coincidence in war, Mrs. Hartley. Only aftermath. They moved deeper along the vault, following the chalk arrow's direction. The air was colder now, edged with something metallic. Lamps swung in lazy arcs overhead, casting the illusion of motion where none existed. The corridor ended in a cul-de-sac of sealed storage bays. Rusted plaques bore numbers, B71, B72. Here, Grant said, below North proper. Tuppence opened one of the smaller cabinets. Inside were ration cards, worn diaries, a tin of old morphine ampules. Another box held water-damaged folders stamped signals, confidential. Someone searched here already, she said. The dust's been disturbed. Pike crouched beside her, lifting a small wooden crate lid. Inside lay only packing straw and an old label marked medical, linen returns 1945. Grant's mouth tightened. Every clue leads back to the same word, medical. Tuppence nodded slowly. And Mrs. Hartley's hands smell of carbolic. Mrs. Hartley drew herself up, indignation fighting composure. Because I've been touching the walls and helping your inspector. If I carry disinfectant, it's habit. Old habits die hard. Tuppence smiled faintly. Not all of them, perhaps. The tension rippled like static. Then, faintly at first, a draught stirred the dust near their feet. The vent grills shuddered. Air whispered through unseen tunnels. Tommy looked upward. We're not alone down here. Before Grant could answer, a light snapped off at the far end of the row. Darkness crept forward like ink. Then, a clatter. A door banging against its frame. Grant drew his revolver. Stay together. They moved back toward the main vault, torches slicing the dark. For a moment, they glimpsed motion. Someone turning a corner, coat hem vanishing around the bend. Grant gave chase. Tommy followed, boots echoing. Tuppence held back, scanning the shadows. A moment later, a single metallic ring clattered to the floor. A key, dropped or thrown. It spun, winking under her light before settling. She picked it up. The bow bore an engraving, B. Lower North Med Stores. When Grant returned, breathless and empty-handed, she held it up silently. He took it, frowning. A key to medical storage. Left for us, or dropped in flight? Both, perhaps, she said. The next move belongs to whoever still believes in keeping calm and carrying on. Her voice echoed softly in the cold, echoing vault, where dust settled over empty shelves and the faint scent of lavender clung like memory itself. The order came from Inspector Grant like a sharp command from an air raid drill. Cut power to the older bays. We'll check the compromised lines before anyone meddles with them again. The electrician hesitated only long enough to glance at the flickering bulbs, then flipped the master switch. Instant night. The blackout fell with the weight of memory. The hum of the lights ceased, and in its place came the thick, breathing silence of a bunker that remembered bombs. The air pressed in, close and intimate, thick with dust and the ghost of fear. Somewhere in that dark, someone drew breath too quickly. A shoe scuffed, a slow scrape on concrete, and then a small metallic ping echoed into the void. Something had fallen. Tommy reached out blindly. "Tuppence!" Her fingers found his. "I'm here," she whispered. "Listen for the chipped heel." They stood very still. The blackness was absolute. Then, there, a soft clack. Another, lighter, then silence. Grant's voice cut through, low and harsh. "Nobody move." The smell of carbolic drifted faintly through the air. Then, a sudden spark. A match flared, the tiny flame guttering in a trembling hand. It illuminated faces for the briefest instant, eyes wide, sweat on temples, pale ovals in the dark. The flame was snuffed out at once, but in that flicker, Tuppence had seen everything she needed to. When the emergency lamps stuttered back to life with a low electrical hum, everyone was exactly where they had been before, except for one small change. On the floor near Mrs. Hartley's feet lay her fountain pen, the cracked capped one. Its barrel was unscrewed, the inner cavity empty. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Pick it up," he said softly. Mrs. Hartley bent, composed as ever, but her fingers trembled as she held it out. Tommy took it from her, unscrewing it further. "Empty," he said. "Not even ink." "Could a microfilm fit inside?" Grant asked. Pike gave a small, knowing shrug. "Perfectly. It's an old trick." The inspector's gaze turned next to Greaves, whose habitual self-assurance seemed to falter. "And you, sir," Grant said. "Would you kindly explain this?" He held up a second keyring, modern, polished, glinting under the dim light. It had just been found in the politician's coat pocket. Greaves flushed scarlet. "Ministerial oversight," he began stiffly. "I'm authorized for—" "Authorized for what?" Grant interrupted. "That key matches the new lock on the map room door, the one that's been replaced since this morning. Convenient, isn't it?" Greaves's jaw set. "I had them cut during the refurbishment. Symbolic continuity, nothing more." "Symbolic indeed," Tuppence murmured. Dr. Liddell's notebook slipped from her hand as she fumbled for her glasses. Tommy caught it and frowned. 3 pages torn out, he said. I must have misplaced them," Tuppence suggested gently. "During the blackout?" Before the historian could answer, Grant turned to Pike. "And you, Mr. Pike, how'd you scrape your hand?" Pike looked down at the raw graze across his palm as if seeing it for the first time. "I must have brushed the wall in the dark," he said. "Or a drawer," Grant said evenly. Tuppence's eyes, sharp as flint, swept the room. The faint antiseptic tang was stronger here, mingled with lavender. She crouched near the old first aid cabinet, the one she remembered seeing earlier, and ran a finger along its frame. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "The depth." Grant joined her. "False panel?" "Yes." She slipped her penknife along the seam, and with a faint tug, a false back peeled away. A clever construction of linen stiffened with paste. Behind it, wrapped tightly in yellowed gauze, was a slim bundle of onion skin pages wound around a wooden dowel. The tape that sealed it had browned with age, and even from a distance came the unmistakable scent of lavender and disinfectant. Tuppence's voice was barely audible. "Pages retained under medical care." The Morse phrase, the missing ledger. Mrs. Hartley gave a small, strangled sound. Not surprise, but release. Her composure cracked like ice. Grant stepped forward. "So, you kept it hidden here? All this time?" But Mrs. Hartley's eyes weren't on him. They were fixed on the lower shelf of the cabinet, on a half-full bottle of carbolic. Before anyone could move, she lunged, not for the ledger, but for the bottle. Glass shattered against the floor, releasing a burst of white vapour. The air filled instantly with choking fumes, sharp and acrid. Tuppence staggered back, coughing. "Stop her!" Grant shouted, but Mrs. Hartley was already through the doorway, her footsteps echoing up the narrow service stair. Tommy was after her in a heartbeat, Grant close behind. "Tuppence, stay back." She ignored him, pulling a handkerchief to her mouth and following. The fumes burned her throat but cleared her head. The world narrowed to the rhythm of pounding feet and the quick, frantic clack-clack of a chipped heel on concrete. Then, halfway up, the sound changed, a sharp snap, followed by a hiss of pain. "She's broken the heel," Tuppence called. "Corner her," Grant shouted. They reached the landing just as Mrs. Hartley turned, limping, her face wild in the flickering emergency light. The years had fallen from her. She looked younger, desperate, almost defiant. "You don't understand," she cried. "They meant to bury it. Bury all of it. Bulldog wasn't corruption, it was salvation. We bought peace with it." Grant levelled his voice. "You murdered Kersey to keep it quiet." "No," her voice broke. "He found me. He brought the letter, said he knew where I'd hidden it. I offered him money. He laughed at me. He said he'd sell it abroad. I only meant to frighten him. The chloroform, I didn't think. He fell, struck his head." She took a shuddering breath, eyes darting to the ledger in Tuppence's hands below. "I kept it safe, all these years, because they'd have destroyed it just as they destroyed the others. Churchill himself ordered it sealed. Better the public never know what kept the lights burning. And he was right. Men like Greaves, men like Bligh would twist it to their own glory." "Yet you killed to protect it," said Tuppence quietly. Mrs. Hartley flinched. "I protected England. Do you think victory came free?" Grant moved a step closer. "Give me the key, Mrs. Hartley." Her right hand clenched. Between her fingers glinted the brass shape of an old warded key, its jagged edge fitted over her knuckles like a weapon. "Don't come closer," she hissed. Tommy tensed, ready to move, but Tuppence raised a hand. "Let me." She climbed the last few steps slowly, her voice low and steady. "Do you remember the nurses during the Blitz, Mrs. Hartley? The sound of the sirens, the blackout curtains. You were one of them, weren't you? I can see it still, the way they stood in the corridors when the bombs fell, holding the trembling hands of strangers." Mrs. Hartley's eyes flickered. "You carried those wounded boys down to the shelters," Tuppence went on softly. "You spoke to them until the noise stopped. You told them lies of comfort, and you believed every one of them. Because that was courage. The ledger didn't win the war, Mrs. Hartley. People like you did." For a heartbeat, silence. Then, slowly, her fingers loosened. The key slipped, clattered to the floor, and rolled against the wall. Grant stepped forward, catching her arm as her knees gave way. She looked up once, at Tuppence, not in hatred but in weary gratitude, and then let her head bow. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," she whispered. "I only wanted to keep the truth safe." "The truth has its own way of surviving," Tuppence said quietly. Later, in the map room, the air still smelled faintly of carbolic and history. The ledger lay open on the table, its pages filled with neat, faded script. Names, sums, destinations. Men who had bought silence, men who had sold it, and a country that had done both in the name of victory. Tommy ran a hand over the cover. "It's smaller than I imagined. The secret of an empire, bound like a recipe book." Grant closed his notebook. "The Home Office will decide what happens to it. My bet is it goes back into a vault." Tuppence looked around at the shadowed walls, at the pipes and the cables humming faintly. "It'll never really stay buried," she said. "History always leaks through the cracks." Grant gave a small nod, like gas through a faulty vent. Pike stood by the door, one hand bandaged now. "The Smithsonian will be very interested to hear it survived, though perhaps it's better if they don't." Greaves, pale and subdued, muttered, "We'll never agree on what to tell the press." "No," said Tuppence, "and that's as it should be. Truth divided keeps everyone honest." She closed the ledger gently, the lavender scent lifting once more into the air. "For all her sins," she murmured, "Mrs. Hartley was right about one thing. Some debts of war were never paid, only carried." Tommy slipped an arm around her shoulders. "And sometimes," he said softly, "that's the only way they can be." Outside, the storm had passed. Through the air vents came the faint sound of traffic above, life resuming, unknowing, unbothered. The bunker, at last, exhaled. The past had spoken, and for now it was content to sleep. The air in the briefing room was thick with fatigue and the sour tang of disinfectant. Outside, the bunker's generators hummed steadily again, but the echoes of the blackout still lingered like a collective shiver. Mrs. Hartley, no, Henrietta Keene as she had finally named herself, sat opposite Inspector Grant, her face composed but drained of every artifice. She spoke quietly, the voice of a woman long used to silence. "I was 24 when I was sent here. A nurse seconded to the war rooms. I thought I'd been chosen for my efficiency. I hadn't realized I was being chosen for my discretion." Grant's pencil scratched across the page. "Go on." The Bulldog Fund was created to buy loyalty, at home and abroad, a little cash to oil the gears of victory. Some of it went to couriers, some to local officials, some to people whose help couldn't be acknowledged in daylight. It wasn't all noble, some of it lined pockets, but it worked, and when the war ended, they decided that the ledger itself was inconvenient. She gave a small, bitter smile. Orders came to burn the papers. I disobeyed. I couldn't stomach the thought of history erased so neatly. I hid the pages among medical stores. They'd never think to look there. Tuppence's voice was gentle. "And you meant to guard it forever?" "No," Keene said softly. "I meant to keep it until someone with cleaner hands than mine could tell the truth. I thought Dr. Liddell might be that person." Dr. Liddell blinked, startled. "Me?" "You were cataloguing the missing files honestly," Keene said. "Even when Greaves ordered you to omit references that might embarrass the ministry. I hoped, you would know what to do." Liddell looked down at her notebook, her voice small. "I wanted only to understand the record, not bury it." Grant turned the fragile onion skin pages over with a pencil end. The neat typewritten lines seemed to whisper as he read. Names, dates, payments, half the government's conscience on paper. He paused. "Here, see this. Late April 45. Requisition 14C, courier run diverted to civilian channels. Withdrawal signed A.B." Colonel Bligh, standing near the door, stiffened visibly. "That," he began, his voice tight, "that was authorization, not theft. Those initials mark my clearance on delivery, nothing more. I don't touch the funds. I signed because the accountancy office was in ruins from the bombing." Grant studied him a moment. "You're sure of that?" "Quite sure," Bligh said sharply. "Though I imagine you'll think otherwise. Everyone always does, after a war's been tidied up." Tuppence's eyes lingered on him. The indignation was genuine. If Bligh was lying, he was very good at it. But it was a soldier's hurt pride, not a villain's guilt. She turned her attention instead to Greaves. He stood at the far end of the table, hands folded with politician's care, his expression unreadable. "You've had a busy week, Mr. Greaves," she said lightly. "Supervising new locks, commissioning new keys, arranging convenient refurbishments, and a story ready for every discovery." Greaves gave a polished smile. "Public relations, Mrs. Beresford. One must make heritage relevant." "Relevant," Tommy echoed dryly, "as in controllable." Greaves's smile faltered. "You suspect me of staging this nonsense for the newspapers?" "I suspect you of wanting a scandal you could manage before someone else managed it for you," said Tuppence. "The blue thread from the new lock, the key ring in your pocket, the ministerial bluster, those aren't crimes, but they're certainly clues." "Speculation," Greaves said tightly. "Observation," she corrected. Pike had been silent until now, but his American drawl cut through the air. "If you want a less glamorous confession, I'll offer one. Those missing notebook pages? My doing. I copied a few docket numbers for cross-reference. Scholarly zeal, nothing more. Cut my hand on that cursed steel cash box in the dark." He raised his bandaged palm. Grant eyed him skeptically. "Convenient wound." "Unromantic one," Pike said. "If I'd meant mischief, I'd have done it before the lights went out." Tuppence studied him, considering. The scrape was fresh, but the gesture rang true. Red herring, perhaps, but unintentional. Her gaze shifted to the ledger again. "Inspector, what time was Kersey's watch stopped?" Grant flipped a page. 7:12. Why? "Because," Tuppence said slowly, In the old maintenance log for this level, the lighting circuit changes to generator feed at exactly 7:12. It's a moment of complete darkness, just half a minute, but absolute. Tommy leaned forward, meaning whoever met him there chose that time deliberately. Exactly. A planned meeting in the dark. Someone who knew the system by heart. Grant frowned. That narrows it. Yes, said Tuppence quietly. To a wartime insider. Someone who once moved easily through these corridors when the lights went out and the bombs shook the walls. Someone who could walk by memory alone. Her eyes lifted to Henrietta Keene. The nurse met her gaze without flinching. I told you I didn't mean to kill him. He surprised me. He came earlier than we agreed. Grant's pen stilled. Agreed? I wanted the ledger back before Greaves could make a show of it, she said simply. I asked Kersey to bring me the key tag. I meant to send it on to Dr. Liddell quietly. But he was greedy. He said he'd sell it. I tried to stop him. Her hands, folded neatly on the table, trembled only slightly. He fell against the panel. His head struck the bolt. I panicked. And afterward? Tuppence asked. I dragged him to the crawl space. I thought, stupidly, that if I could make it look like theft, they'd search for thieves, not truth. I left the tag in his pocket to divert suspicion. Tommy's brow furrowed. You also knew how to disable the lights. She gave a faint, weary smile. Old habits. During raids, I used to kill the power in these corridors myself. I knew the timing still matched the old switches. Grant's voice was low. And you still believe you did the right thing? She looked up, and for the first time there was something fierce behind the fatigue. I believe the ledger belongs to history, not politicians. I kept it safe from greed, from ambition, from men who would twist it. Perhaps I went too far, but war teaches you that righteousness has a cost. Dr. Liddell spoke softly. You could have trusted me. Keene's lips curved into something almost like kindness. My dear, you're too honest. The world eats honest women alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. The bunker hummed around them, the same unyielding machinery that had outlasted generations of secrets. Finally, Grant closed his notebook. The Crown will decide what to do with you, Mrs. Keene. I'll see you're treated fairly. But I'll tell you this. You've given historians enough to argue over for 50 years. She smiled faintly. Then I've done my part. Later, as the officials dispersed, Tuppence and Tommy lingered in the corridor. The bunker felt quieter now, its menace gone, its air lighter somehow. Tommy rubbed his chin. Well, old girl, it's a curious thing. A murderer who believed she was a patriot, and a ledger that proves her half right. Tuppence smiled. The past never settles its debts neatly. It merely changes the handwriting. Do you think the ministry will bury it again? Undoubtedly. They're very good at burial, he chuckled softly. And us? We'll write it down, of course. Truth has to live somewhere. As they reached the stairs, Tuppence paused, glancing back once more at the silent corridors. The fluorescent lamps buzzed faintly, casting sterile light over concrete walls that had heard too much. Do you hear it? She said quietly. Tommy listened. What? The ticking, she murmured. Kersey's watch stopped, but the sound remains. It's only the pipes, I know, but it feels like time, insisting. Tommy smiled. You're turning poetic again. She looped her arm through his. Poetry's safer than history. They climbed the stairs together, leaving behind the labyrinth of the past. Above them, London waited, indifferent, eternal, alive. The bunker had quieted again, though its silence was never complete. Somewhere in the walls, pipes murmured, and the faint tremor of London's underground trains rolled like distant thunder. Tuppence stood in the map room, the letter that had started it all lying open on the desk before her. She read the line again, her lips moving silently. We shall fight upon the lands. That was the error, upon, not on. It had bothered her from the beginning. Kersey's note had made the same mistake, and Mrs. Hartley, Henrietta Keene, had repeated it aloud in her statement. Coincidence, perhaps, or authorship. Tommy entered quietly, carrying 2 enamel mugs of tea. I've seen that expression before, he said, nodding toward her frown. Usually it means you're about to ruin someone's alibi. Tuppence took the tea absently. Words betray habits more surely than fingerprints. Upon the lands. No one who's read Churchill would make that error. They'd heard it quoted, not seen it printed. Mrs. Hartley said it. So did Kersey's note. That could mean she wrote both, or someone copied her mistake. Tommy leaned against the wall. But if she's not the killer, then our murderer is clever enough to imitate her, Tuppence said softly. And imitation is the sincerest form of misdirection. She turned toward the great wall map, the one that dominated the room like a faded monument to empire. Pins still marked convoy routes, supply lines, field hospitals. Faded paper, dusted with age, but still humming with the ghost of wartime purpose. One pin caught her eye at once. Among a sea of dulled brass, a single red-headed tack gleamed too brightly, its paint unchipped, its shaft barely oxidized. She touched it, and the map gave a faint tremor beneath her fingers. "Tommy," she said, "look here." He joined her. "That one's new, but it's not marking anything, just the middle of the North Atlantic." "Exactly. Nothing there to mark." She prized the pin free with her nail. The metal bent slightly, soft, recent. A whisper of movement followed, the faint scrape of paper shifting behind the frame. Tuppence's pulse quickened. Carefully she slid her hand behind the edge of the map. Her fingers brushed something thin and papery wedged in the narrow gap. She drew it out, 3 torn notebook leaves, creased but legible. Dr. Liddell gasped. "Those are mine!" Tuppence examined them. "The missing pages from your notebook, I think." Grant moved closer, reading over her shoulder. "Names and figures," he murmured. "Payments, some under Bulldog. Look here, H. Keene, secure custody." Liddell's face drained of colour. I hid them," she confessed. "After Mrs. Keene was taken away. I thought, if the ledger vanished again, at least the evidence would survive. I didn't mean to mislead anyone." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Fear and honesty rarely travel together, Doctor. You hid them because you understood what they meant." The historian's hands twisted nervously. "Those names, they include senior officials. To publish them would ignite a scandal. I wasn't ready for that weight." Tommy set his tea down with a soft clink. "Weight or not, it seems someone else decided for you. Hiding papers behind a wall map is a bit theatrical, don't you think?" "It wasn't me," she said earnestly. "I slipped them into my folder during the commotion. Later, when I checked, they were gone." Grant nodded grimly. "Then our thief was tidy. Took the pages, planted them here as a red herring." Tuppence bent again over the map, her eyes narrowing at the pinhole. "Perhaps not a herring, a pointer. Look, this pin's placement matches one of the lines on the ledger." She traced the faint pencil path marked Convoy X7. These coordinates were linked to that April courier run, the one diverted for private use. Tommy frowned. "So whoever hid the pages was drawing attention to it." "Or away from it," Tuppence replied. "Either way, they wanted the map noticed." Grant's radio crackled. A constable's voice came through with clipped efficiency. "Inspector, found plaster fragments on the service stair. Triangular impressions consistent with chipped heel." Grant looked up. "Hartley's shoes." Minutes later, under the glare of the bunker's lamps, the pieces were laid out like a tiny archaeological find, pale shards with embedded flecks of rubber. The heel chips matched perfectly. Tuppence examined them thoughtfully. "She did go up those stairs, but that doesn't prove murder, only movement." Grant gave a thin smile. "In this business, movement is half a confession." Hartley, Henrietta Keene, was brought in. Her face looked carved from resignation. She met Tuppence's gaze with an odd serenity. "I won't lie any more," she said. "Yes, I took the antique keys from Kersey's hand. Reflex, I suppose. I meant to hide them before anyone saw, but I didn't kill him. He was already gone." Tuppence studied her. "You believe us fools enough to think you could steal from a corpse out of sentiment?" The woman's chin lifted slightly. "I spent my war among the dying, Mrs. Beresford. Reflexes form that never leave you. You check the pulse, you straighten the fingers, you take what mustn't fall into wrong hands." Tommy's voice softened. "So the reflex wasn't greed?" "No." Grant closed his notebook. "But you still lied about being alone." Keene's eyes flickered just once. "Because I wasn't." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pipes seemed to pause. "Who was with you?" Grant pressed. She shook her head. "Someone I believed was helping me. Someone who said the lights would be cut to give us time to move the file. I never saw their face, only their voice in the dark. Confident, calm, like someone used to giving orders. Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. A mimic, then, she murmured. One who could walk the corridors like an insider. Grant scowled. Half the people here fit that bill. Not quite, Tuppence said. She moved back to the desk and picked up the letter again. The misquotation, it's a mask. But when Mrs. Keene referred to the map room, she called it the sweat box. Liddell blinked. But that's Clark's slang, not nurses. Exactly, Tuppence said. And Dr. Liddell herself repeated the same misquotation this morning when she read the note aloud. Imitative, not instinctive. Someone fed her those words. Someone who wanted to blend voices, blur authorship. She turned to the map once more. The red pin gleamed faintly in her palm. Every clue here speaks of duplication, echoes, copies, microfilms, even imitated phrases. Our killer hides by repetition. They don't create, they mimic. Grant's jaw tightened. Then find me the original. Tuppence's eyes drifted to the wall clock. Oh, we will, but there's still one name on that ledger that hasn't answered for itself. Whose? Tommy asked. She held up the notebook pages, her finger tracing the last entry. Courier X7, authorized by A.B. Colonel Bly's initials. Grant swore softly under his breath. We've been chasing shadows while the daylight suspect stands before us. Tuppence shook her head. No, Inspector. Bly's outrage was too raw, too human. He's many things, but not a liar. The true killer learned to sound like an insider, to move like one, to plan by the wartime clocks. They've been here all along, within arm's reach. Her voice lowered, the words edged with certainty. And when we find who set that blackout, we'll find who struck the final blow. Tommy exhaled. Then we'd best hurry, because somewhere in this bunker our mimic's still listening.